Hi, this is Jeff with FrostyGarden.com, and boy, are we tired and exhausted. But we're very pleased because we've got our gardens entirely planted and we are ready to go into summer. It takes a long time to get here, and I realize that if I'm going to make a video, I better do it now because otherwise it ain't going to happen. So this one is going to be about our 1,700 square foot community garden and everything we do to plant it and prepare it for the summer. Hope you enjoy. Before we head to the garden, we just want to give a brief talk about how we read the season this year. We noticed that we were getting exceptionally cold temperatures leading up into the summer, and usually that's a sign that it's very realistic that we might get some late frosts. It turned out we ended up reading the season very correctly and ended up getting some snowfall when we least expected it. So, the way we mitigate things is we basically plant our cold hardy and our frost tolerant plants before we plant anything frost sensitive. And it's only once we're 100% sure that we're not going to get any late frost that we actually plant anything that might be frost sensitive. Since we garden at a community garden that isn't at our house, we end up having to transplant our plants. We use 1020 trays as our plant mobility solution, and that's a really good thing for us. We literally just chuck our plants in our truck or our car and drive them down to the garden. Our community garden is actually rather large, and so it's not really practical for us to fertilize the entire thing end to end. So what we do is we basically dig a small hole for our transplant, and then we'll mix in our fertilizer into that hole. We use Down to Earth's BioLive, which is a really great fertilizer, and it has mycorrhiza, so it has a long-term strategy for our soil. But we mix that fertilizer into the soil, and then we transplant in after that. And generally, our nutrition strategy for this garden is we're using liquid and water-soluble fertilizers almost entirely to do the nutrition. This is really just to give the plant some initial nutrition that it needs to get started. We generally plant a whole lot of brassicas at this garden, and that's good for us because it's a very cold hardy plant. And that turned out being exceptionally a good idea for us this year. It turned out that several days after we planted in our community garden, we actually ended up getting a snow. And this was a day after our last frost. So in cold climates, you can expect the unexpected sometimes. But generally speaking, we held back our squash that we also grow at this garden, and we're really glad we did. Unfortunately, some of our fellow community gardeners had planted their squash, and they ended up losing them to that late frost and snow. So, generally speaking, that strategy of planting from cold hardy to frost sensitive is a really good strategy to employ. One of the biggest pests that we have at our community garden are voles. If you're not a northerner, basically it's somewhat similar to a mouse. And essentially they like to go after plants, and specifically they really like to eat brassicas. So we use a protection technology, if you could call it that, of solo cups. And you might think that we actually plant into solo cups, but that's not actually what's going on. What we do is we cut out the bottom of the solo cups, and then we take that solo cup and we put it over our plant and then twist it into the ground around our transplant. And what this does is basically if a vole approaches our plant, they end up hitting that solo cup. And when they do that, they just turn around and go to another way. So we end up using this on all of our brassica plants, and it is just a generally good technique if you don't have other ways of protecting your garden. This garden takes us several hours for us to totally plant, and generally speaking, after we transplant into the ground, then we go in and we water our plants afterwards. It's really important after you transplant to give it nice deep watering, and what this does is this encourages the plant to root more deeply. So if the water is available down lower where the roots are, the plant will throw down roots to try to get access to that water. Once we get done with our transplants, it's time to move on to planting our potatoes. So we keep some of our previous season's potato harvest as our seed potatoes for the next year, and we love this because it makes them a perpetual crop. We're also incredibly lazy when it comes to planting our potatoes. Essentially what we do is we dig a hole about 10 to 12 inches deep or so, throw in a seed potato, and cover that back up. Since we're planting 2 rows of 40-foot potatoes, it's actually quite a lot of digging. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of offset where we dig the next hole, and then we'll move on to the next hole after that. We'll throw in a seed potato and use the dirt from the previous or the next hole's dirt to cover the previous potato. And we basically go down the entire line that way. It takes us usually about an hour or so to plant all of our seed potatoes, and really we try not to put a whole lot of effort into potatoes at all. They're a low effort crop, and we try to treat them that way. We also like to grow snap peas and runner beans at this garden. We have about a 40-foot trellis or so, and we generally plant about 2/3 to snap peas and about 1/3 to runner beans, and that's usually a good amount for us that we like to eat over the winter. And generally speaking, what we do is we plant our snap peas about 2 inches apart and our runner beans about 4 inches apart. We just plant the entire trellis and get down the entire way, and then after that, we're good to go with all of those. When you're gardening at a remote location, it's really important to make regular visits. We like to visit our community garden every couple of days, especially right after we transplanted. It's super important to make sure that they don't need any additional water, but if it does rain, we often won't visit right away. So generally speaking, what we do on our visits is we'll again water our plants and try to make sure that they're extremely well hydrated. We also want to check after any kind of cold temperatures or frost like we got. We were pretty much at our garden right away after that frost and snowfall because we wanted to make sure that our plants were generally okay. And because we'd only planted cold-hardy plants, we were just fine, and it turns out our plants were pretty much okay. They did get a little bit of frostburn, but overall it wasn't unsurvivable, and as long as you follow that strategy of planting from cold-hardy to frost-sensitive in cold climates, you're going to be fine. Once again, I'm Jeff with FrostyGarden.com, and I want to thank you for watching. We're a small channel with a small potential audience, and those likes and subscribes really do help us. If you think we've earned it, we would love it if you gave us a like and subscribe. Once again, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.